My boyfriend's family humiliated me publicly, but I turned their cruelty into my biggest triumph. I never imagined that the person I trusted the most would orchestrate my downfall in front of everyone I loved, but that fateful night changed everything. I had always been the reliable one, the person who stepped in to fix problems, to soothe over hurts, to clean up the messes left behind by those who cared more about appearances than genuine connection. But when my boyfriend's family turned their sneering glares and insidious whispers into a public spectacle of betrayal, I was forced to confront the painful truth that my desire to please and help had made me vulnerable. What began as a shocking moment of humiliation at what was supposed to be our celebratory anniversary dinner spiraled into an unexpected journey of self-discovery and fierce empowerment, a reckoning that would forever alter not only my relationship but also my understanding of family, love, and self-worth. I've always considered myself the responsible one, maybe even the glue that held everyone together. Growing up in a household where chaos reigned, I was compelled to sacrifice my own happiness for the sake of smoothing out every conflict, every argument, every fallout between siblings and parents alike. It wasn't that I didn't have dreams and aspirations, but more that I believed my value was in being the dependable pillar amidst others' storms. When I met Alex, whose gentle smile and steadfast support made me believe I could finally let someone else take care of some of the burden, I felt a glimmer of hope that I wouldn't always have to be the fixer. Yet, as time went on, I found myself trapped once again, in a relationship where Alex's family treated me with the kind of condescension and entitlement that slowly chipped away at my self-esteem. Alex's parents, the kind of people who prided themselves on a pristine public image and an unyielding sense of entitlement, always seemed to have an undercurrent of jealousy simmering beneath their affable exteriors. They would casually remind me that my modest job and small apartment paled in comparison to the lavish success of their family business. Their subtle digs and backhanded compliments compounded into an oppressive atmosphere in which I continuously felt like I was less than. I brushed off these comments at first, attributing them to awkward attempts at humor or the natural dynamics of blended families. But that evening, during my first major gathering with Alex's extended family, a reunion that had been meticulously planned as a celebration of achievements, I would witness the culmination of years of condescension manifest in a way that I'd never experienced before. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the chill in the air mingled with the warmth of anticipation for joyous festivities. I remember arriving early at the upscale venue, nervously straightening my outfit in the reflective glass doors and rehearsing the pleasantries I would exchange with relatives I barely knew yet who evidently wielded a disproportionate amount of power in our relationship. Alex had reassured me that this dinner was meant to be a celebration of new beginnings, an opportunity to bridge old wounds in a family that prided itself on its polished reputation. I arrived with optimism and the same earnest kindness that had always served as my bedrock, believing that if I just continued being the genuine, caring person I was, everything would eventually work out. That hope was brutally dashed when, a few minutes into the dinner, a family member I once thought was relatively benign, a sharp-tongued cousin named Rebecca, tapped her glass, drawing the attention of everyone in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began with an insincere smile, "I think we should allow our dear Alex the opportunity to share just how much our mutual friend here has contributed, or rather, failed to contribute, in recent times." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and I felt the color drain from my face as every eye shifted towards me with a mixture of pity and smug satisfaction. The prearranged cruelty unfolded like a staged performance. One by one, members of Alex's family recounted anecdotes designed to expose my vulnerability, to undermine my self-identity as the ever-responsible caretaker. They recited tales of awkward financial favors, of whispered criticisms about my career, even of subtle insinuations that my love for Alex was motivated merely by convenience and necessity rather than genuine affection. I was paralyzed by shock and humiliation, my mind blanking out as I desperately searched for the one good word to say, the one defense to mount against this barrage of public degradation. There was no escape from the relentless inciting incident happening right in the midst of a meticulously curated dinner meant to honor unity and achievement. It was a betrayal that felt like it cut through every thread of my being. In the days that followed, I was consumed by a tumult of emotions, disbelief, anger, and an overwhelming sense of inadequacy, a direct reflection of the poisonous seeds planted by Alex's family over years of subtle manipulation. I began questioning every decision I'd ever made. Was my dedication to smoothing out family chaos the very thing that made me an easy target? Was I simply too trusting, too eager to believe that kindness would someday be met in kind? As I grappled with these painful questions, I could feel the smile I once wore with pride slowly turn into a mask of painful uncertainty. Alex, caught in the crossfire between his overwhelming loyalty to his family and his love for me, offered only tentative apologies and half-hearted attempts at reassurance. I remember him hesitating each time I asked why his parents would publicly humiliate me, his eyes darting away as if the answer were too damning to speak aloud. The struggle was not limited to emotional wounds alone. In the aftermath, I began facing practical difficulties too. Friends, once supportive, now offered guarded sympathy, wary of entangling themselves in the web spun by such an influential family. I noticed a subtle withdrawal from colleagues at work when rumors had begun to filter out of the dinner. Financial pressures, a recurring theme in my life, were exacerbated by the fact that Alex's family had long been exploiting my generosity by frequently loaning me money that I never saw returned. Every dollar I spent covering unexpected expenses now felt like another reminder of my vulnerability. I worked long hours, trying desperately to reclaim my self-worth by throwing myself into my job, yet every success was shadowed by thoughts of that disastrous evening. It took me several sleepless nights and a series of emotionally draining confrontations with my own internal critic before I began to see a glimmer of a solution, an opportunity to reclaim my narrative from those who had made me feel insignificant. At my lowest point, when I was teetering on the edge of resigning myself to a life of quiet misery and self-blame, an unexpected message arrived from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Jade, a fiercely independent woman who had once shared many late-night heart-to-hearts about the burdens of familial expectations, reached out with words of comfort and a reminder that I deserved to be loved and respected. "You don't have to carry everyone else's baggage," she wrote simply, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that her words might hold the key to my liberation. Emboldened by her support, I began to question the very dynamics that had long defined my existence. I started to document every slight, every cutting remark exchanged under the guise of family niceties. I maintained a meticulous journal, noting the names, dates, and exact words of each instance of public humiliation. What began as an act of therapeutic catharsis slowly evolved into a calculated collection of evidence, one that revealed a pattern of manipulative behavior orchestrated by Alex's family for years. I pored over old emails, text messages, and voicemails, unearthing the subtle gaslighting and veiled insults that had, until that fateful evening, been dismissed as harmless banter. The more I uncovered, the more it became clear that I was merely a pawn in a game where maintaining the family's pristine public facade was worth sacrificing anyone who dared to disrupt the carefully constructed narrative. Yet, as I delved deeper into the toxic dynamics of my relationship and the associated family ties, I began to realize that the problem wasn't solely external, it was also deeply internal. My years of people-pleasing had blinded me to my own intrinsic value, and my constant striving for perfection had rendered me incapable of setting firm boundaries. In a moment of painful clarity, I recognized that if I continued to allow myself to be defined by the cruelty of others, I would forever remain trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and humiliation. The turning point, for me, came on a rainy evening when I sat alone in my cramped apartment, the steady beat of raindrops on the window mirroring the rhythm of my racing thoughts. I found myself questioning the very essence of my identity. Was I truly meant to be the perennial caretaker, or was it finally time to reclaim the power that had always been rightfully mine? Determined to break free from the chains of my past, I made the decision to confront the situation head-on, not with anger and vengeance, but with the quiet resolve of someone who had endured enough pain to understand the true cost of silence. The next morning, I reached out to a trusted mentor from my professional life, someone who had always encouraged me to stand up for myself and believe in my own worth. With trembling fingers, I sent an email detailing the events of that horrific evening, along with the documented evidence of years of subtle abuse. My mentor's response was immediate and unwavering: "You deserve better, and now it's time you demand it." Her words sparked a dormant courage within me, a belief that I was capable of rewriting my own narrative. Armed with this renewed determination, I began to rebuild my life with deliberate, measured steps. I enrolled in a series of workshops on assertiveness and self-empowerment, determined to undo the years of deference I had incubated. It wasn't easy. Old habits, like deeply entrenched patterns of self-doubt and a desperate need for approval, often resurfaced. There were days when I would look in the mirror and nearly weep at the sight of the person I'd allowed myself to become. But with every session, every conversation with Jade and my mentor, I felt a little bit more of the heavy weight of responsibility lifting off my shoulders. I rediscovered my passions, long-forgotten hobbies like writing and painting, and started a blog where I poured my heart out, sharing the raw, unfiltered truth of my journey. The process was cathartic, a way to reframe the narrative of abuse into one of resilience and self-discovery. Meanwhile, the toxic influence of Alex's family began to unravel in ways I hadn't anticipated. Alex, torn between his loyalty to his parents and the undeniable pain he saw in my eyes, finally confronted the reality of our predicament. One evening, as we sat in the quiet of our living room with the soft hum of a television providing a backdrop to the tense silence, he broke down in tears. "I never realized how much they were hurting you," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I always thought it was just harmless teasing, but I see now that I was blinded by tradition and obligation." His confession, though late, was a turning point. It was as if a dam had burst, and for the first time in months, I felt validated, my pain was real, and those who had inflicted it were finally being acknowledged. Our conversation that night was long and fraught with difficult truths. We argued about how long I had allowed this behavior to continue, and I questioned whether he truly understood the full extent of the damage. In the coming weeks, however, we began the slow, tentative process of healing together. Alex distanced himself from his family's manipulative influence, making it clear that my well-being would no longer be sacrificed at the altar of maintaining appearances. The day of reckoning, as I started to call it in my mind, arrived in an unexpectedly mundane manner. I was invited by a close friend from work to a casual dinner, an event that would also be attended by several relatives of Alex's who had been vocal in their criticism. I hesitated, knowing that this could very well be an opportunity for another public humiliation, yet I resolved that I would no longer cower in fear. With Jade's supportive texts echoing in my mind and the firm, steady tone of my mentor's voice reminding me of my intrinsic worth, I stepped into the venue with a calm determination I had never known before. The atmosphere was as tense as ever, and I could feel the weight of scrutinizing eyes. Yet this time, I was prepared. As the murmurs and smirks began to surface, I rose to address the room. I recounted, calmly, clearly, the documented history of subtle abuses and manipulations, not to demean or create further drama, but to reclaim my narrative. I spoke about how years of being the ever-responsible fixer had robbed me of the chance to live authentically, a burden unjustly imposed by those who thought themselves superior. I explained the toll that constant deference had taken on me, both emotionally and practically, and I used my hard-won evidence to underscore the pattern of indifferent cruelty I had endured. There was a moment of suffocating silence, the kind that grips you as you await an explosive reaction. Instead, I saw a reluctant acknowledgement in a few eyes, and even Alex's cousins exchanged discomfited glances. I wasn't looking for violent confrontation or a dramatic standing ovation, I simply wanted them to see the immense cost of their behavior and, I hoped, to instigate change that would spare someone else from the pain I had suffered. After that night, the ripple effects of my revelation were undeniable. Some members of Alex's family, confronted with the undeniable truths I had laid bare, began to distance themselves. Others, entrenched in their own self-righteous narratives, refused to relent, but their influence over my life had diminished visibly. I didn't seek to ruin anyone, I merely sought justice for myself and an end to the cycle of emotional manipulation that had defined so much of my existence. Over time, I realized that true empowerment wasn't about exacting revenge, it was about forging a future where I could stand tall, unencumbered by the expectations and criticisms of others. I began to truly thrive. I started a successful side project that blossomed into a full-time venture, one that not only provided financial stability but also allowed me to channel my creative energies in ways that made me feel truly alive. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, I still had moments where the old anxieties crept in, whispers of self-doubt that threatened to derail my newfound confidence, but I had built a foundation strong enough to withstand the internal storms. My relationship with Alex evolved, too. We attended therapy together and individually, unpacking the layers of resentment and hurt that had accumulated over the years. The trust that had once been fractured slowly began to mend, replaced by a cautious yet genuine effort to redefine what love and support truly meant to us both. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean ostracizing those who once cared about you, but it does require setting clear boundaries and demanding that your dignity is respected. Alex's gradual estrangement from his family's destructive influence was painful to witness at times, yet it was ultimately a necessary step in reclaiming the life we both deserved. Looking back now, I realize how profoundly that night of public humiliation reshaped my life. What initially seemed like an insurmountable betrayal actually became the catalyst for a series of life-altering changes. The journey was peppered with moments of crippling doubt, nights spent tearing apart my decisions, and days where I questioned whether I had made the right choice in confronting a family that so many held dear. At times, I longed for the simplicity of ignorance, for a time when I could take comfort in the false security of being the ever-reliable fixer. But as the sharp edges of that identity began to soften under the light of my own truths, I discovered that I was capable of so much more than I had ever dared imagine. I now understand that my value was never tied to my ability to be everything for everyone else, it was inherent, rooted in the very core of who I am. The responsibility I once carried so heavily was eventually reconfigured into self-respect and authentic care. Every awkward silence, every stinging remark, every tear shed in that restaurant became a stepping stone towards a bolder, more unyielding version of myself. I learned to appreciate the transformation that came with pain and to celebrate the slow yet steady process of reclaiming one's own narrative. In the months that followed my brave confrontation at that dinner, life began to reveal unexpected turns. I started receiving messages from people who had been inspired by my story, messages thanking me for being a voice against a culture that so often thrives on silent subjugation. Some reached out sharing their own struggles, and I found solace in the collective strength of those who had suffered quietly for too long. My blog, once a small corner of the internet, began to attract readers who found resonance in my journey. It wasn't long before I realized that this transformation wasn't just about setting myself free, it was about offering hope to others, proving that even in the darkest moments, there is a way forward. As for Alex's family, the reverberations of that night lingered like an uncomfortable shadow. While some members eventually attempted to offer perfunctory apologies, their words rang hollow against the backdrop of years of neglect and cruelty. I learned to let go of the need for complete reconciliation, instead choosing to focus on my own healing. Their actions, fueled by deep-seated jealousy and a desperate desire to maintain a polished image, ultimately proved to be their undoing. The seeds of their entitlement had sown distrust and division within their ranks, and over time, those relationships began to crumble under the weight of their own contradictions. Today, as I sit by my window watching the rain gently trickle down the pane, a sound that once reminded me of loneliness and despair, I now feel a profound sense of gratitude for having survived the tumultuous period of my life. I have come to understand that every moment of humiliation, every instance of feeling diminished, was a lesson in resilience. I found strength in vulnerability and power in reclaiming my voice. I have built a life that is not defined by my past mistakes or the cruelty of others, but by my determination to write my own story. The journey from that dreadful dinner to the present day has been paved with hardships and heartaches, but it has also been illuminated by the rediscovery of love for myself, for genuine relationships built on mutual respect, and for the potential that lies within each of us to rise above adversity. There are moments when I still catch myself wondering if I could have done something differently, if perhaps I was partly to blame for inviting such harsh treatment by always placing others' needs above my own. Those contemplations serve as gentle reminders that I am human, flawed and beautifully imperfect. They also remind me that growth isn't linear, it is a series of ebbs and flows, of setbacks and leaps forward. I now celebrate even the small victories, a kind word exchanged in a moment of vulnerability, a professional milestone achieved against all odds, and the silent, but resolute, decision each day to stand tall and assert my true self. In sharing my story, I do not seek pity or to cast blame indiscriminately upon those who have wronged me. Instead, I want to shine a light on the often unspoken struggles of being the one who always feels responsible for smoothing over the chaos of others' lives, a role that, while born of love and kindness, can sometimes obscure our own needs and dreams. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, I say this: your worth is not determined by how much you sacrifice for the comfort of others, nor is it measured by the hollow accolades of those who take you for granted. You deserve not only to be heard, but to be celebrated for the person you truly are. My journey of transformation is still unfolding, each day a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. I have learned that confrontation can be quiet, that empowerment can arise in the aftermath of humiliation, and that thriving in the face of adversity is the sweetest form of rebellion. While I carry the scars of that public betrayal as reminders of a painful chapter, they now serve as badges of honor, symbols of the deep, unyielding strength that was forged in the crucible of adversity. In time, I grew to understand that my greatest triumph was not in exposing the callousness of Alex's family, but in finally reclaiming the power to live my life as my own, unburdened by the weight of unrealistic expectations or the toxic need to please others at the expense of my own happiness. Today, I look back on that painful evening not with bitterness, but with a sense of profound gratitude. It was the catalyst that forced me out of the shadows of selfless servitude and into the bright, unpredictable light of self-discovery. It taught me that while we might sometimes stumble in front of those we love, we have every right, and indeed, every responsibility, to rise again, more determined and self-assured than ever before. I now live with a quiet confidence, bolstered by the lessons learned during those dark days and nurtured by the love and support of those who truly value me for who I am, not for what I can do. And so, as I continue on this unpredictable journey, I remain committed to embracing my authenticity, speaking my truth, and inspiring others to do the same. I celebrate my flaws, my victories, and even the moments of doubt, for they all contribute to the vibrant tapestry of a life lived fully and unapologetically. The scars may remain, but they are no longer symbols of defeat. Instead, they are emblems of a journey marked by courage, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of self-respect. I transformed humiliation into a crucible for change, emerging more complete than ever before, with the quiet knowledge that what once sought to break me now serves as the foundation of a life defined by hope, empowerment, and unwavering self-love.